In the wet dawn stillness of New Haven, the bell of St. Halvard's lay fractured in the belfry, mouth split in rust like a scream forgotten. Fog hung low, seeping through the splintered panes of the Sinclair manse, and in the attic where the air soured with mold and mothwool, a boy traced the iron loops of a chain around his throat, whispering the names of saints with the deliberation of someone reciting a curse. Jeremiah Sinclair was 12. His eyes, pale as slate, carried none of the softness his age might suggest. Instead, they watched constantly, devoutly recording the weight of every breath and betrayal in his father's house. He bore the smile of someone who had never cried convincingly. Ezekiel's heir, they called him, but already, whispers, replaced the name with something else. Chainboy, whisper priest, the white crow. His games were unlike those of other children. They gathered in the chapel behind the ashen schoolhouse, their hymnals abandoned, cheeks smudged with soot from the burning barrel Jeremiah insisted they light. The pulpit was a box of apple crates. The altar, a cracked mirror covered in a burial cloth. When the other boys asked what they were meant to do, he only said, "Tell the lie you would die for." And they did. In the breathless hush that followed, even wind sounded sinful. One confessed to murdering his mother's bird, another to impure thoughts about a girl in a red bonnet. And though none of it was true, Jeremiah received it as though sacred, kneeling, head bowed, fingers trembling over the ledger he carried bound in lambskin and soot. His red quill cut from the tail feather of a barn owl struck dead outside the courthouse glided over the names. Always names, always written in red. They must be named, he told them, or the fire doesn't know who to cleanse. By the third week, the children were lining up for it. There was relief, even joy, in the ritual. To be marked was to be seen. To be seen was to be spared. What they did not yet know, what Jeremiah would never say, was that the names written down were never just erased. They remained stained. The cleansing came during Lent. Cold fell hard that year. The river froze with the limbs of deer still inside it. Father Ezekiel had withdrawn from the town's affairs, his health said to be in decline. But Jeremiah took to the pulpit of the schoolhouse with inherited fire, reading from the book of Amos as if he'd written it in another life. The town, wearied and swollen with silence, began to listen. He said the children had seen visions, of shadows with no feet, of candles that wept blood, that sin had entered the bones of the town, and only the pure would survive what was coming. The fire knows, he murmured, and the fire remembers. The boy he chose was Michael, barefoot, red-haired, the only one who refused to kneel. He laughed during the blessing. Jeremiah said quietly one morning. He spat in the baptismal font. He mocked the cleansing. None of it was true. Michael stood in the center of the chapel, blinking in the dust. His eyes searched the faces around him, landing on Jeremiah's with disbelief rather than fear. He opened his mouth to protest, but another boy, Henry, took his hand. "I saw him do it," Henry said. His lip trembled. "I'm sorry." There was a silence that could not be broken, even by the wind's moan outside. Jeremiah stepped forward and placed a chain around Michael's wrists, not tight, just enough. Then he led him to the fire. He didn't strike him, didn't scream. The boy was made to stand barefoot in the ashes, recite a psalm with a mouth full of salt. Jeremiah washed his feet with vinegar. The other children chanted his name. Michael never returned to school. His mother said he took ill. But the children knew he had been marked, and when you are marked, you do not come back. Still, no adult intervened. In fact, when one of the teachers, Miss Althea Crane, wandered into the chapel weeks later and found the soot-marked altar and red-inked ledger, she wept quietly and said, "Maybe now the Lord will see them." When asked by the parish board what she meant, she only whispered, "The fire knows." And so Jeremiah's legend grew. He added a ritual bell, one rung for every lie confessed. A bowl of coldest passed hand to hand. A new rule, confessions, must be whispered to him in the dark, with eyes closed, hand upon chain. Only in blindness, he said, can the soul be known. Some nights, he stayed in the attic until dawn, writing. The soot-black ledger grew thicker, its spine cracked. The red ink dried in crusted flakes. But still he wrote, alone in the silence above his father's study, while Ezekiel Gray, blind, half madranted in dreams of judgment and smoke. And one day, the page tore. He did not mean to. His hand slipped. A girl had confessed a name, his name, not in anger, in awe. "I dreamt you were the fire," she'd said. "Not in it, of it. The ink bled. The paper, old as bone, gave way beneath the quill's point. And suddenly, there was silence not just in the room, but in the very air around it. The birds outside stilled. The stove downstairs went cold. Jeremiah stared at the torn page, its edge like the mouth of a wound. The name was still visible, his own, written in red, by his own hand, by accident or omen. He tried to blot it out, but the red only deepened. That night, he wrapped the ledger in his father's burial shawl and locked it in a tin box. On the lid, he scratched one phrase with the edge of a communion coin, Sinclair burn on CGHT. Then he buried it in the attic chimney, behind the soot bricks, and covered it with chains, not because he feared it would be found, but because he knew it could never be forgotten. And beneath the floorboards, something breathed, something old, something waiting to be named again. In the lull between frost and thaw, when roofs bled rust and the fields exhaled fog, the chapel school behind St. Lyle's orphanage remained still too still. No laughter, no recitations, just the hush of cedar pews warping in cold, and the sigh of hymnals unopened for weeks. In the choir loft, where dust curled like incense smoke, Jeremiah Sinclair traced the links of an iron chain across his lap and listened. He wasn't praying, he was waiting. 12 winters and a name that coiled in mouths like smoke. Jeremiah, the son of Ezekiel, the boy who rarely blinked. His eyes were pale gray and oddly dry, like ash that refused to scatter. His voice, soft as candle wax, bent the air around it. The children followed him not out of love, but necessity. Jeremiah saw them, every guilt, every flicker of jealousy, lie, or loneliness. And more than that, he offered relief, not forgiveness, but transformation. That winter, he began a practice he called the naming. He gathered them beneath the broken pulpit, where the stained glass cast sickly colors on their cheeks, and he whispered, "Say the sin before it eats you, even if it is not yours." The younger ones hesitated, so he led by example. "I envied my father's voice," he said one afternoon, voice low. "It made people kneel, so I poisoned it with silence." The children stared. "My mother went mute before she bled. I made her forget hymns." I watched. The others began to confess, too. Not truths, not really just sins they had heard of, dreamt of, or imagined. They offered the darkness like petals into a bowl. "I stole milk. I wished my brother dead. I thought of a knife during morning prayer." For each sign, Jeremiah marked their name in a thick black ledger bound in cracked skin. He used red ink only, always red. The names soaked through the page like wounds. When one child asked why, Jeremiah only murmured, "Because blood is what fire recognizes." They began to come willingly, even the older boys, because after each naming came the cleansing. Jeremiah would wrap a dull iron chain around the penitent's wrist, not tight, not cruel, then guide them to the bell platform behind the altar. The bell had not been rung since the Sinclair boy died years before, but the platform remained, ringed by ashes from past incense and faint soot marks that no scrubbing could lift. He made them stand barefoot in the cold. He would chant a psalm, from memory, never from the book, then pour vinegar over their feet. Once salt, once snow, each time different. He called it variations in mercy. Michael Porter was the first to cry. "I didn't do anything," he whispered. "I didn't sin." Jeremiah looked at him with something close to pity. "That's not what matters." It wasn't rage. It wasn't punishment. It was ritual, measured, precise, sacred in its repetition. The chain, the name, the cleansing. No, adults stopped it. Miss Althea Crane, the oldest nun left at St. Lyle's, stumbled upon one of the ceremonies. She stood frozen behind the sacristy door, watching Jeremiah tie a ribbon of soot around Sarah Elmont's wrist as she confessed. Too pride in beauty, a child of 7, blind in one eye, stuttering through shame she did not own. Althea's lips parted, but she did not speak. Later she said, "I remembered Ezekiel's voice, how he made the air tremble. This was like that." Word spread, quietly, then with speed. Jeremiah was not rebuked. He was praised. "He keeps them from sin," someone said. "He teaches humility," said another. Even the abbot, when he visited, placed a hand on Jeremiah's shoulder and nodded. A shepherd born young. But something shifted when the ledger grew to full. Jeremiah added a second book, smaller, bound in unmarked black. This one he did not show the others. In it, he wrote only initials, and only those who confessed lies. The children didn't know how he could tell, but he always did. If you fake the darkness, he warned, you summon it. What he meant, none could say. Henry Moore was the first to vanish. He'd confessed, to envy of the dead, said he wished to lie still and warm in the ground. The next morning, his cot was empty. The staff said he'd been sent to a farmstead west of the village, but no carriage tracks marked the snow. 2 weeks later, Annabeth climbed to the bell platform after a cleansing and pressed her ear to the iron post. She swore she heard chains rattling inside the hollow. When she told Jeremiah, he smiled faintly. The fire remembers all things. Soon after, he stopped speaking altogether during the rituals. He would tie the chain in silence, guide them wordlessly, then ring the old copper handbell once one chime. No more. It echoed strangely, flat, as if the chapel itself had swallowed it. The others began calling him the Quiet Warden. It was not unkind. Children left food near his cot, small offerings, licorice, wool threads, bits of chalk, but none dared touch the ledger, except Sister Eliza. She had returned to St. Lyle's to tend the archives after her mother's death. A quiet woman in her 40s, veiled, always in black eyes, dulled with grief. She saw Jeremiah one night writing, under candlelight, lips moving soundlessly, the chain draped over his shoulder like a stole. Something about him, his stillness, the way he didn't flinch at the flame, struck her as familiar. The next night, after he'd gone to sleep, she found the ledger tucked beneath the altar. She opened it, page after page of redinkt names, sins, imagined or inherited, desires no child should know. She read until she found one name circled twice, her own. Eliza Sinclair. Vanity, silence, Aricuria, and she dropped the book. For a long time she did not breathe. Her family had buried the Sinclair name after the fire. She had changed hers in the order. No one should have known, and yet he had. She stared at the bell platform, remembered the stories, how the original bell rang only once, when Ezekiel's son fell from the belfry, how afterward it had been varnished, black and never used again, how it never tolled at funerals, only in Jeremiah's rituals. Softly, by hand, she rose slowly, walked barefoot across the ashless floor, climbed to the platform, and knocked. Once. The iron vibrated not hollowly, but with something deeper, something alive, as if her knuckles had struck not bell, but bone. Jeremiah stood below her. He hadn't been asleep. Eliza, he said, without surprise. You knew, she whispered. He said nothing, only raised the chain. She looked at it, then at him, and wept, from fear, but from memory, because the last time she saw chains like that, her brother had been bound in them, his face pale, his mouth silent, and his name was Ezekiel. She stepped down, took the chain, wrapped it around her own wrists. Say the sin, he whispered. She opened her mouth, but only ashes fell out, and the bell, though never struck, let out a sound like a weeping child swallowed by smoke. By late autumn, the fog rolled differently in the valley around the Sinclair estate. It no longer drifted, it clung, like breath against glass, like memory. The east wing, untouched since 1880, jutted from the manor's body like a severed limb walled in flesh, bricked over, boarded, sealed with 7 layers of silence. None entered, none emerged, yet somewhere behind the crumbling stone and ivy-wound buttresses, a room had once been constructed with no corners. They called it, in the only surviving blueprint, inverted devotion chamber. Elias Mehta, archivist and orphan of the floodplain parish, had come to the estate under pretense of restoration. In truth, he came for names. Not his, though he suspected it was buried somewhere in the pages, but for those who had disappeared from the rolls, from the bells, from the world. He carried with him a satchel of linen gloves, a brass-ribbed lantern, and a hunger not even faith could bridle. He found the blueprint on the 6th day, pressed between the ledger of sacraments and a book of condemned hymns. The paper was yellowed, hair-thin, marked with faint red wax in the shape of a rose with no petals. The room was described in delicate ink and impossible geometry, no 90-degree lines, no shadowed corners, just curves and arcs and an octagonal cradle suspended in the center. Underused, a single phrase, propagation chamber for generational alignment. Elias stared long after the lantern burned out. The east wing had been bricked, not simply to collapse, spacebot to entomb something that could not be unbuilt. He waited until midnight before approaching the seal. The mortar crumbled, easily edged with rot and resignation. It gave way under gentle tools, as if wishing to confess. Behind it, a narrow corridor with walls the color of milk left too long in a The air was wrong, heavier than dust, older than mildew. It hummed faintly. He entered. The nursery lay 12 paces deep, encased in silence. It did not smell like any other room. Not ruin, not death, but parchment, candle wax, and something sweetly. Fermented pears gone too soft, breath caught too long. Elias raised his lantern. It was precisely as drawn, seamless. There were no corners, not in wall, ceiling, or floor. No seams where shadow might hide. The entire chamber curved inward, a mouth mid-side. At its center hung the cradle, suspended by red velvet cords that disappeared into the ceiling's smooth dome. The cradle swung gently, though no breeze stirred. Inside lay nothing, no dust, no cloth, just the cradle-polished walnut, lined with black varnish. But the walls bore murals, not painted, inlaid threads of soot, ash, and faded. Gold ran in whirls depicting infants not held, but knelt too. Women with veiled faces wept upward, mouths open in reverence. At their feet, bells, overturned chalices, and chains shaped like halos. Elias moved along the perimeter slowly, trailing his gloved fingers. One phrase repeated beneath each scene: the body is the oath, the blood is the proof. Something creaked. Behind him, he turned quickly. USELESSLY. The doorway had vanished. No brick, no frame, not even absence, only curve. Seamless as womb. Elias did not scream. He had not come to be comforted. Instead, he stepped toward the cradle. He stared into it, half expecting a trick of light, a hidden inscription. But there was only varnish so black it swallowed reflection. He leaned closer. The lantern's light pooled, but revealed nothing. Then something moved beneath the varnish. A ripple, a pulse. His hand trembled. He reached forward, fingertips brushing the edge. The air hissed. Suddenly, the murals shifted, not physically, but perceptibly. The women's veils seemed thinner. Their faces, if they could be called that, were mouths. And their hands, once folded in prayer, now rested on their own bellies, which had been stitched shut with red thread. Elias stumbled back. The cradle swung harder. He looked down at the floor, heart clawing toward his throat. Beneath his feet, new words had emerged, not painted, written in moisture. Kemba, grief, inherited, recited. He staggered toward the wall, hands pressed flat. It bent, not crumbled, not opened, bent. Like skin beneath pressure. He understood, suddenly, what kind of room this was. Not a chamber for birth, not death, but transformation. An altar with no outside, a loop. This room didn't allow corners, because corners held decisions, angles, opposition. This room held none, only surrender. He pressed his forehead to the wall. "What did you do here?" he whispered. Behind him, the cradle stopped swinging. He turned, slow, breath, shallow. In it now sat a hymn book. He hadn't seen it before. He hadn't heard it drop. He stepped toward it, legs shaking. The cover was soft leather, crimson. The title etched not in ink but stitching. Little Oaths. He opened it. Inside, the lines weren't lyrics. They were names, pages of them, everyone written in a child's hand. Kemba, Sinclair, Crane, all names that had vanished from registry but lived here. Stitched in red. He flipped to the last page, a date, July 13th, 1880. Then a single entry. Mother said, "I was ready." I lay in the no-corner place. I opened my mouth and swallowed the black bill. It was cold, like remembering. Elias dropped the book. The cradle creaked again, but no wind moved. No child wept, only silences, complete as water. He backed away, but the floor shifted. Beneath his boots, the mural rippled. Not just image, substance. The figures in gold moved. The bells rang. The chains tightened. The air smelled of blood and hymnals. He fell to his knees, and when he looked up, the cradle was empty again. But beside it now stood a figure, small, barefoot, hair slicked to its skull. No face, just skin smoothed over where eyes should be. But its mouth was open, and from that mouth came a sound like a bell rung in reverse. Elias screamed, then, but it made no sound. And in the center of the room, etched freshly into the black varnish of the cradle, was a single word: remembered. Eliza never remembered falling asleep. Only waking face wet, breath short, her hands twisted into the skirts of her morning gown. The chapel air was sour with old oil and salt. Moonlight slivered through the rose window, barely touching the altar's stone lip. The others had long since left. She remained unable to explain why. She was not one for visions, but something had returned to her. Something born in blood and soot. She heard it again. From beneath the floorboards, a voice, not quite wind whispering a psalm. Not in Latin, not English, a language never taught. She turned her ear to the cracked tiles. The sound was there, precise and measured, as though reciting from memory. But the cadence was wrong, too slow, syllables pressed too tightly, as if each one had been stitched shut, then forced open again. Silence, she whispered. The name didn't echo. It fell flat as a moth against glass dot. Every generation of the Sinclair line bore one child named Silence, a girl, sometimes a boy, always mute, always gone by 8. They called it tradition, but the name was never entered in the birth records. Only in the black-edged family Bible, the one wrapped in wax cloth and sealed with a braid of human hair. Eliza had seen it once. When she was 8, her mother took her to the east attic and opened the velvet box. Inside lay that book and a small ring of keys. Every family must offer its silence, her mother said, without looking up. The Lord loves a house that listens. Eliza asked nothing. She had learned by then. Questions were punished with prayer, long prayer, bare-kneed, tongue-bitten, hours in the dark. But now, in the ruin of St. Lyle's Chapel, that voice came again, not crying, reciting. She knelt, pressing her ear flat against the stone. Beneath her, a wooden understructure, old beams, hollow slats. She traced the sound to the far side. Near the altar step where the soot had settled deepest, she drew a shard of the broken hymn stand and pried at the tile. It cracked easily, revealing dust-packed boards. Whispers bled through, not louder, closer. She scraped until her fingernails bled, until her palms were raw, until the board lifted like a hinge, long forgotten, a space, narrow, stale, and in it, curled like an offering, was a child, no older than 6, barefoot, hair matted with soot and wax, skin pale as candle gut. Their lips moved slowly, repeating the same verse over and over. Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord, but not in any tongue she knew. Still, the rhythm was unmistakable. She leaned in. The child did not flinch, only shifted slightly, as though making room. Eliza whispered, "Silence." The child blinked. She reached forward, trembling, fingertips brushing skin that felt not cold, but untouched by temperature altogether. A stillness that was not sleep, not death. Preserved. And around the child's neck was a thin chain of thorns, not metal, real, twisted and dried, pressed to the flesh without breaking it. She reached to remove it. The child's hand shot up. Not in violence but plea. Single quotes. She drew back, breath choked. A murmur rolled through the chapel rafters like air being drawn through teeth. The candle stubs at the altar guttered. Then the floor beneath her shook. Only once. Enough to dislodge dust from the beams. Enough to remind her she stood over something older than wood. Burial. She looked again at the child. They had closed their eyes, still mouthing scripture, still not sleeping, and something else now filled the room. The scent of wax and lavender and copper. Old sacrament. She knew it. Her mother had worn it every Sabbath. Eliza stood. The mural behind the altar, long covered in soot, began to show beneath the flaking black shapes. Not saints, children, all, faceless, kneeling in rows, chains linking their wrists. Above them, a woman, veiled, holding a bell with no clapper. She turned from it, heart stammering. The chain. The child, the silence. They were never missing. They were offered. Every generation named one. Child silence. Not to lose them, but to preserve what must never be said. The sins, the rituals, the ledger entries, too dark to bury yet too beloved to burn. They needed a vessel, a container with no echo. And now she had opened it. A voice behind her, soft and sharp. He said you'd come. She whirled. Jeremiah stood in the doorway, taller now, shadow-boned. His eyes were not cruel. They were old, tired. Silence remembers, he said. Even when the rest of us forget. Eliza's voice cracked. Is it alive? Jeremiah stepped past her, kneeling beside the hole. He corrected gently. He touched the child's brow. She's what's left. Of what? Eliza wanted to scream. but the words were locked behind fear. Jeremiah looked up. You dreamt her once. You just didn't wake with it. Eliza staggered back. In her 8th year, she had dreamt of a girl beneath the floor, hair like thread, eyes full of fireflies, mouth moving too slowly to scream. Her mother told her it was indigestion, a child's nerves. She remembered now. She's speaking a dead tongue, Eliza whispered. No, Jeremiah said, she's speaking what was buried, so we didn't have to. And in the cradle of the floorboards, Silence opened her eyes. They were grayed dot, like Ezekiel's, like Eliza's, like stone worn smooth from kneeling, and she spoke not loud, not soft but final, words that no longer existed, but Eliza understood them. She fell to her knees, and for the first time in 20 years, she began to weep. Beneath the chapel something shifted, chains, a bell, a name, and the child named Silence began again at the start of the psalm. The doors to the Sinclair choir school had not opened in 43 years, and yet the candles still burned. Each dusk, Sister Eliza passed by the ivy-choked east corridor on her way to the chapel, and found them, pale flames flickering behind the stained-glass windows of the music room, blue-tinged and motionless, as if trapped in glass rather than glass letting them through. No caretaker, no matches, just fire that never left ash. She had stopped asking. There were places in the estate where inquiry thinned the veil, and silence was a kind of reverence. But one morning, in the fragile frostlight of late Lent, she found herself standing before the carved oak doors of the choir hall, gloved hand hovering at the handle. It had been Jeremiah who spoke of the room once, in passing. They still sing, he'd said. Elisa, haunted already by too many truths in the Sinclair name, asked only, who? He'd looked at her with eyes like shuttered windows, the ones who never grew, and now she stood at the threshold. The handle turned easily. The door opened without sound. Inside, the choir room was immaculate, untouched by time's usual cruelty. Dust did not gather here. No rot bloomed. The air was cold, but not dead, more like preserved breath. A great organ lined the back wall, its pipes clean as bone. The pews were polished, hymnals stacked in even rows, each one marked with a red ribbon that never fell. But what pulled the breath from Eliza's chest were the portraits. 19 frames, arranged in 3 rows, gold-gilt, slightly tarnished, but uncracked. Each child faced forward, pale and expressionless, eyes just wide enough to unsettle. None smiled, none frowned. Their hands, folded or hanging, were perfectly still. Their clothing, identical black cassocks with high collars and crimson sashes at the throat, the brass plaques beneath. Each bore only a first name and the year of arrival. No last names, no departures. Between 1855 and 1877, 19 children had entered the Sinclair choir. None aged, none left. Eliza stepped closer, breath shallow, eyes drawn to the middle row. She remembered these faces from the estate archives, newspaper clippings, letters, scribbled complaints, questions gone unanswered. They were real. Once, but not anymore. She reached for the portrait of Tobias, 1862. His eyes were pale blue, near colorless. She remembered writing once, long ago, that they reminded her of smoked glass. Now they reminded her of stone under ice. As she stared, the corners of his mouth twitched, just slightly. Not a smile, not a frown, a recognition. She stepped back. The organ moaned behind her. Not a full note, not played, just the low, sighing creak of keys remembering weight. Eliza turned. The room remained empty. The benches, the music stands, the locked cabinet where sheet music was once kept, all unchanged. But the hymnals now stood open, each one to Psalm 9:4. They break in pieces thy people, O Lord, and afflict thine heritage. She shut one slowly, and then, behind her, came the sound she feared most. A child's voice, soft, not sung, recited, then another, then more, then more, layering. 19. No melody, just harmony of rhythm. A choir of mouths long stilled, singing without lungs. She turned to the portraits, and saw the mouths moving. Every one, open now. Small teeth, blackened, tongues red like wax. They were singing, but not to her too. Something above. She followed their gaze. High on the arched ceiling, painted over in soot and decay, she made out a faded mural, a bell, suspended by chains, hovering above the choir. Beneath it, mouths open, pleading. And beneath them, flames, but no angels, no saints, only children, burning. Their songs became screams. Eliza clutched the hymnal. The voices fell silent. Then, from the organ loft, came a single note, played slow, held too long. A child sat at the keys, black cassock, crimson sash, hair short, parted, no face, only skin where features should have been, stretched taut and pale like candle drippings, and still it turned toward her. She stepped back, knees buckling, heart stuttering. "You shouldn't be here," the child said. Its mouth never moved, but she heard it in her bones, in her blood. "I wanted to teach you music," she whispered, tears catching at her throat. The portraits began humming. The hymnals closed. The organ's pipes hissed like something exhaling soot. "You did teach us," said the voice. "We learned to hold the note until it hurt. We learned to sing without air." Elisa backed to the door. "Why didn't you grow?" she asked. The faceless child stepped from the loft. "We weren't meant to. Growing is for those with futures." She turned the handle that it did not budge. The portraits turned their heads. In unison, 19 pairs of eyes, 19 voices. "We are the song that keeps the gate closed." The faceless child stood before her now. A single bell charm hung from its wrist, black with tarnish. "Eliza," it said, "do you remember what you sang before you were born?" Her lips parted, and she did a low, solemn hymn, no words, only a hum, the lull of a vow made by blood before breath. A promise to return. She sank to the floor. The candles guttered. And from the ceiling, the bell in the mural cracked. A red line split the stone, and the portraits began to age. Skin sagged, hair fell, eyes shriveled into sockets, but those mouths remained open, still singing, and, in her own mouth, Eliza found herself humming Psalm 94, line by line, until her voice no longer sounded like her own. The pages were black at the edges, not burnt, completely no. Something had preserved the center, as if the flame had recognized the words and stepped back in reverence. Elias found the sermon buried beneath a collapsed lectern in the ruins of the Sinclair prayer house. Mold had overtaken most of the Bibles. Hymnals lay split open like birds gutted at the spine. But the sermon remained, wrapped in wax cloth, marked only by a string of rosary beads. Every bead cracked but one. He unfolded it with gloved hands. The parchment trembled in the windless air. "Only hollow vessels may receive the Lord." It was written at the top in a hand that bent language into something both sacred and threatening. The name at the bottom, Father Abel Sinclair. Elias had seen the name before, a ledger entry, a stone plaque, with the date chiseled out, and once, in a child's drawing, discovered beneath the floorboard a man with no eyes, leading people into a lake, one hand raised like a shepherd, the other holding a chalice brimming with ash. The sermon was dated May 12, 1891. The day of the final mass. No records remained after that. The congregation dissolved. Families left. Some were never found again, but the lake remained. Elias walked there that night. He took the sermon, the rosary, and a lantern lit with blue oil. The trail was overgrown, lost beneath layers of moss and seasonal forgetting, but the stones still showed faint carvings, symbols of thorns, bells, and the cracked eye that had appeared throughout Sinclair texts, an emblem for sight. After understanding. The waterline lay flat and black, swallowing sky without ripple. There was no wind. He stood at the edge, just beyond the chapel's reflection. Then, from his satchel, he drew out the parchment and began to read. Aloud. Not with belief. With hunger. The sermon was brief, uncomfortably so. "Children of the flame, you carry your own noise. You sing when you should receive. You remember when you should be emptied. Only the vessel unfilled can house the divine. We shall pour out our knowing. We shall unlearn the body. We shall walk into the deep." Elias stopped. The words caught somewhere beneath his ribs. He felt lightheaded, not from meaning, but removal. He looked to the lake. The reflection shimmered, just slightly, then stilled. And there, for the first time in 40 years, he saw them, barely visible, just beneath the surface. Rows of shapes, not bodies, not quite. Figures. Hands folded, feet bare, garments undisturbed. They did not float. They knelt, mouths open as if still singing. Elias stepped back. His heels struck a root. He didn't fall, but the lantern swung wildly, casting long, distorted shadows over the reeds. Then he heard it, a hymn. Distant. Off. Key. Layered voices, soft as breath on glass. No words, only vowels stretched too far, like a prayer remembered by a dying tongue. He turned toward the chapel ruins, and saw light dot inside. He walked back, guided by the song. The roof had collapsed long ago, but the altar still stood. The pews had rotted to splinters, save one, third row, left side. It remained whole. A figure sat upon it. He did not run. He knew the Sinclair pattern. To chase was to invite, to approach was to listen. He stepped inside, eyes wide, breath thin. The figure wore priest's robes, though no dust clung to the fabric. The sash shimmered with something darker than crimson where its head was bowed. Then it lifted. No eyes, no mouth, but a face nonetheless, carved, it seemed, from the memory of humanity, like a death mask, smoothed of grief. Its hand rose and pointed to the wall behind the altar. Elias turned. The bricks had crumbled there, revealing not stone but glass. Behind it, embedded like relics, were more sermons, dozens, each sealed in wax, each marked with ash crosses, and beneath them, etched into the glass, "We emptied to be held." He turned back. The figure was gone, but the pew remained warm. He approached the wall and touched the glass. It pulsed beneath his fingers, then cracked. Not violently, just enough for the wax to weep. A single page slipped forward. He caught it and read, "We do not teach faith, we teach forgetting. We do not preach salvation, we preach vacancy. We are vessels, we are wells. The soul is noise, the soul must be wrung out." At the bottom, the mark of Abel Sinclair, a bell, drawn by hand, with no clapper. Then a date, day of the hollowing. Elias pressed his forehead to the glass. He understood. It wasn't a mass, it was a ritual. They hadn't walked into the lake in delusion. They walked because they believed, because they had been taught not to fear drowning, but noise, not death but fullness. He stood there a long time, and from outside the hymn continued. But now he heard words. "Make me empty, make me still, make me water, make me will." His hands trembled, the lantern dimmed. He stepped back into the night. The lake no longer reflected, and on its surface, barely breaking the skin of the water, 19 heads bowed in prayer. Their mouths opened in silence, and beneath their feet, something shifted. Like breath, or waiting, or invitation. Elias fell to his knees, and whispered, "I hear you." The water did not ripple, but one voice rose above the rest, familiar, worn, his own. Eliza dreamed of the veil again. Not cloth, not silk, not holy. Stone. Smooth as bone, damp as breath, carved in rows of folds like a shroud prepared for burial, and pulsing not visibly, but in some quiet, muscle-deep rhythm, as if the limestone remembered the beating of hearts pressed beneath it. She had touched it once. She was 6, beneath the altar of St. Lyle's Chapel, before they bricked the crypt and salted the stairs. She'd wandered down after evensong, barefoot, candle in hand. The sisters had forbidden it, the place where sight is corrected, but children born into old bloodlines rarely obeyed when the air thickened. She remembered the scent, wax and salt, with an undertone of something like spoiled milk, and the veil itself laid across the stone shelf, like a second altar, not draped, molded. Atop it, nothing, no body, no plaque, just the shape of 2 eye sockets carved into the surface, deep and narrow, like a mask laid too long on flesh. She had pressed her fingertips into the hollows. They had been warm, even then. Even at 6, she knew some part of her had stayed down there, and now, decades later, the veil was stirring again. It began with a boy, 8 years old, no surname worth remembering. He'd run with the older boys, throwing stones at bats and swearing oaths in the shadow of the bell tower. No one noticed when he went quiet, not at first. Children quieted in that village like dogs before a storm. But Sister Meredith found him, the next morning on the chapel steps, kneeling, eyes wide, staring at nothing. He didn't blink. When she touched his shoulder, he whispered, "I saw her." That was all. Then silence. The physician said blindness, no trauma, no lesion, no explanation, just a boy with no sight and no story. Eliza knew. She asked to see him. The boy didn't flinch when she entered the infirmary. He sat upright, hands clasped, lips slightly parted. She knelt beside him. "Who did you see?" He turned his face toward her, the one behind the veil. Her breath caught. "You went below." He nodded. She called. Eliza shivered. The crypt had been sealed with 7 chains and a warding prayer in 1883. Sister Annalise had lost her hearing there. Father Mordecai, his tongue, they called it the consecration vault. But before that, before ritual overtook memory, it was the place where they veiled impure children, not punished or corrected. If you stared too long at the moon, or spoke a word you did not understand, or refused to kneel when the bell rang, you were taken below. They never said what happened, only that you came back quiet. Or didn single quotes, tidn single quotes to Abiam to the boy's cheek. He was cold, but not sick, and from his mouth came a breath that did not belong to him. She's not sleeping anymore. That night, Eliza returned to the chapel. She lit no lantern. The moonlight was enough. It filtered through the rose window like spilled milk, pale and sour. Dust hung in the air, suspended like breath held too long. She stood before the altar. Boards creaked beneath her. She knelt and pried at the floor. The tiles came loose like teeth. Beneath them, the entrance, still sealed, but old seals crack when no one remembers what they hold. The chains were rusted. The warding symbols faded. She peeled them back, one by one, and opened the way. The air below had not changed. It still pressed against the skin like wet wool. It still smelled of stone and vinegar, and something sweeter beneath, like milk left at the foot of a grave. The steps led down in a slow spiral, and at the base, the chamber. Low ceiling. One wall carved with blindfolded faces, another lined with narrow shelves where jars once stood, prayers sealed in glass, long since shattered. And in the center, upon the altar of unblessed stone, the veil, exactly as she remembered, folded limestone, heavy, impossibly smooth, and still warm. It pulsed like breath beneath skin. She stepped forward, her hand shook. She reached toward the veil, and the moment her fingers grazed it, she heard her name. Not in air. Not in mind. In blood. It whispered, "Eliza." She staggered back. The veil had no mouth, only the 2 deep hollows for eyes. But from them, something began to rise. Not vapor, not shadow, memory. She saw herself at 6, pressing her fingers into the stone. She saw the nun who dragged her away. The red welt across her cheek. The silent dinner. The hymn she could never finish. She saw the other children. The ones who didn't return. Sarah, Thomas, little Miriam with the glassy smile. All gone, all veiled. And behind them, behind the veil, something vast and slow and watching. The limestone pulsed again, a whisper, "Only the blind may see me." Then silence. Eliza backed away, breath ragged. She should have fled, sealed the crypt, salted the stair, but instead, she turned and saw footprints, small, bare, leading to the wall. She followed them, and found a second veil. This one smaller. Child-sized. Freshly carved, still damp, and beside it, a name etched into the stone: Mercy. A name that had not been in the registry, a name that had never been spoken. She reached out, touched the veil. And from the stone itself came a sound like the last note of a hymn sung with a split tongue. And beneath it, a heartbeat. Her own, echoed. And the boy upstairs, the blind one, began to sing. The air behind the Sinclair archives always smelled of scorched honeycomb, sweet, but wrong. Elias had long since stopped wondering why. The scent clung to the old prayer books and melted wax seals like memory left out in the sun too long. Most of the records he sifted through were what he expected. Sermon rotas, morning announcements, burial tallies with the same names listed twice, once as child, again as ghost. But that morning he found the bundle, wedged between hymnals in a drawer meant only for rosary ribbons. They were folded tightly, not in quarters, but in peculiar thirds, as though they had once been pressed into a mouth and left there, softened by teeth. Parchment, uneven, ink faded. Elias touched the first page with gloved fingers and frowned. The ink smelled of milk and something else. Mold, yes, but also warmth, like something once alive. He held it closer. The hand was unmistakably a child's. Slanted letters, malformed loops, some words spelled backward, but the spacing was deliberate, rhythmic, as if mimicking a prayer. The top line, "Read." Mama hums from inside the wax. Elias felt it then, a coldness that had nothing to do with the stone floor. He unfolded the rest carefully. 17 in all. Each one different, each one signed with a single letter, SMTS. Again, then nothing. One bore a blotch that looked like a burn, circular and perfect, as if a candle had wept onto it for hours and no one bothered to wipe it away. He carried them to Elisa. She sat in the chapel's western transept, where the wind couldn't find her. Her hair was veiled, not from modesty, but mourning. She read the first one aloud. Her voice trembled after the third line. They said, if I stop asking where she went, I get to be veiled first. That means I get to see what's underneath. They said there's music in the stone, but I think it's just teeth. Elias did not speak. She read the next. My name used to be Miriam, but they took it away when I wept too loud during fasting. Now they call me number 8. I hope Mama can hear me when I blink. Eliza's mouth opened as if to say something, but she did not. The next letter was shorter. I made a doll of wax and salt. It sings to me. I think Mama is in it. She stopped there. The air was thick. The candle beside them hissed, though there was no breeze. Where were they? She asked finally. Elias shook his head. Tucked in the hymnal drawer. She looked at him. No, not the letters. Them. Where were they? He didn't answer, because he knew. And so did she. The veiled wing had once held the girls who asked too many questions, the boys who cried after dusk, the children who refused to confess a sin before breakfast. They were not punished. They were corrected, and if correction failed, they were unmathered, named again, rewritten, returned, as vessels. Or not at all. Elisa unfolded the final page. The handwriting was clearer, still a child's, but with a strange grace, every line perfectly spaced, no smudges, no spelling errors. A learned hand. She read aloud. Mama said names are bells. When they take your name, you stop ringing. But if you whisper into wax, you can ring again. She paused. Her throat closed around the last line. I still have mine. I still ring. From silence, she dropped the page. The floor trembled, just slightly. The letters scattered across the stones like dead petals. Elias bent to gather them, but the pages would not lift. They clung, not by glue, nor damp, but by will. Each one humming faintly. He pressed his ear to the final letter. There was sound, not words, a hum, high, soft, and ceaseless. Eliza stood abruptly. The chapel walls felt narrower, the stone darker. I heard it, she whispered. Elias nodded. So did I. She looked to the altar, then to the choir loft, where Jeremiah had once taught children to confess to sins that were never theirs. Then lower, beneath, the boards. The crypt, sealed in 1883. She walked, slow and barefoot, toward the threshold of the nave. The letters did not follow, but the sound did. A soft, pulsing hum like the breath of a lullaby sung in a tongue buried too long. They descended. The crypt had not changed. The stone veils still rested on shelves, like masks, awaiting new faces. The altar stood quiet, but the wax figures were new. Small, child-shaped forms. Not sculptures. Dolls. Molded from candle drippings and threaded with hair. 17 of them, each facing inward, ringed around a larger figure, unlit, unfinished. Eliza stepped into the circle. The hum grew louder. Elias did not move. He watched her kneel beside the central figure. It had no face, yet just a hollow. She reached into her sleeve and removed the final letter. From silence, she said. She folded the parchment once more, pressed it to the wax, and as her hand withdrew, the wax warmed, melted, and sang. No words, just the hum again. But now, layered 17 voices, then more, a full choir. The dolls vibrated. The air shimmered. And from the mouthless wax, a single note emerged. One Elisa knew, from her cradle, from her first breath, from the last thing her mother ever sang. And the sound said, I was always here. You just stopped ringing. It began the way most forgotten things returned quietly, just after Vespers on the 3rd Sunday of Lent, when the chapel was empty and the air still trembled with incense. The baptismal font began to fill. Not with water. With wax. Soft, pale beeswax, warm to the touch, but not melted, not poured. It rose from within the stone, slow as breath, curling against the carved marble basin like it belonged there. No one saw it happen, but by morning, it sat 3 inches deep, humming faintly. They drained it. Of course they did. Father Dumart called it vandalism. Sister Cara whispered of old rites gone wrong. Eliza, standing at the back of the nave with her hands folded too tightly, said nothing. She remembered, though not aloud, that the font had once been sealed. bricked shut in 1872 after what was then called the Eucharistic sourness. 3 infants lost their voices after baptism. 1 never blinked again. But now the basin was open, recarved, reblessed, and the wax had returned. By the 3rd Sunday of the next month, it filled again, this time to the rim. Still warm, still unscented, still humming if one pressed an ear close enough, and this time they did not drain it, they used it. The baby belonged to Isolde Fenn, a weaver's daughter. Her voice as thin as frayed thread, her eyes milk blue from birth. She carried the child into the chapel on the 4th Sunday with trembling arms and a face that seemed carved from salt. She said the child would not sleep, that it spoke too early, that it laughed when the shutters banged. No priest, she said, only Eliza. Eliza had not baptized in years, her hands were no longer steady, and her faith was not whole. But she stepped forward, she did not kneel. The wax sat, still in the font, glossy unmoving. It reflected no light. Eliza dipped her fingers, warm like breath held in the palm. The child did not cry. She lowered him into the wax. He sank, and stilled. No bubbles, no squirm, only silence. Eliza's hands froze, a breath, too. Then she lifted him. He came out clean, unmarked, but still his eyes were open, but unseeing. His lips were pale. He was warm, but silent. The child did not cry for 7 days, not even when pinched, not when cold, not when held too tightly. Isolde wrapped him in wool and rocked him by candlelight. She whispered lullabies from her own cradle. She held a mirror to his lips. Breath. But no voice. On the 8th day, he made a sound, not a cry, a hum. Low, steady, perfectly pitched like a note held by something not quite lungs. Isolde called it beautiful. Others called it eerie. Sister Cara refused to enter the house. Eliza came in secret. She watched from the doorway, as the baby hummed, that it had no source, no effort, just resonance, like a bell rung inside the chest. And when Isolde turned her back, Eliza saw the child's lips form a word, Mama, not spoken. Shaped. But the voice was not that of a child. The font filled again. Every 3rd Sunday, always wax, always warm, always still. Others brought infants, desperate mothers, fathers too old to believe but too afraid not to. Eliza refused to officiate. Still, the wax was used. They called it silent baptism. They said it made the children gentle, and it did. None of them screamed, none of them disobeyed, but they all began to hum. A call, same pitch, same tempo. They hummed in their sleep, while feeding, while staring at walls, and eventually they began to speak. Not in sentences, in verses, lines from lost psalms, chants no longer taught, words that hadn't passed mortal lips since the doctrine of hollow faith. Ilias found them in the sealed sermon texts, names of angels that weren't, warnings made as lullabies, and he brought them to Eliza. She read them silently, and wept. One child, Ruthie, began, writing backwards. At 3. She carved words into windows with her finger. They all was wiped away by morning but once. Eliza saw them before dawn. She sleeps in the wax. She hears what we forget. The font was drained. Again. This time by force. Salt was poured. Prayers shouted. Wax scraped and burned in the chapel furnace. But the next 3rd Sunday, it filled again. Thicker, darker, now tinged with red. Father Dumont called for sealing, but the masons refused. One slipped on the chapel step and broke his hip. Another gouged his eye while carving the lintel. The 3rd walked into the lake at dusk, whispering the words Ruthie had written. Eliza sat alone with the font. She no longer feared it. She remembered. Now, the first time it filled, she was 12. A different chapel. Then, a different font. She had knelt beside it in the dark, listening to the hum, and she had answered a note, a whisper, a word that was not hers. She never told until now. She dipped her finger again. The wax shivered, then stilled, and she whispered, "You remember me." The wax darkened. Beneath it, something opened, not an eye, a mouth, and from it, a voice, her own but younger, sang the first line of the hymn her mother had died humming. The wax pulsed, and Eliza began to hum in return. Outside the chapel, the wind changed. Inside the crib of Isolde's child, the air thickened. The baby sat upright, and in a voice that echoed to many, he whispered, "Mama's listening now." They called it a mercy at first. The war in France had taken the heads. but in New Lisle Parish, it was the mouths they feared. Confessions left too long unspoken grew teeth, whispered the patriarch. Jeremiah Sinclair, the elder with wax-burned hands, and a voice like dried riverbed. In 1793, he returned from the coast, with a crate that stank of salt and rot. Inside, the iron blade of a guillotine, its wood stained black, its frame engraved, not in French, but in crude Latin confessio, usque mortem, confession unto death. He did not call it a guillotine, he called it the sealer. He set it up in the eastern workshop, behind the chapel where candles were pressed and cooled. He stripped its name of blood and gave it new purpose, not for necks, for wax. Each week he melted beeswax and poured it into shallow mold shapes of faces, mouths open, eyes shut. He pressed the blade down gently, not to cut, but to seal. To fix the expression, to trap the moment when the soul lets go. He told the priest, Father Amarant, a young man then, clean-shaven, devoted, too icily swayed by the illusion of sanctity, was the one who blessed the sealer. He dipped his thumb in oil and touched the rusted edge. He spoke words that were not his own. They said he finished the blessing with tears on his cheeks. They said he screamed into the hollow of his sleeve that night. They said he never stopped hearing the wax breathe. Asterisk. The diary was found in the spring of 1811, stitched along the spine with hair, bound in vellum that felt too soft to be calf. Eliza opened it with gloves on. The first page bled faintly from a smear of red across the title. Account of the blessed conversion of the guillotine of Rouen into the sealer of confession, 1793 to 1796. The entries began clean, measured, then slanted, then broken. By the fifth page, the ink had changed, not just in color but in odor. It smelled of pine, sap, and something else. Resin, blood, a sickness too old to name. Eliza read it aloud to Elias in the cellar, where the wax was now stored. Candles lined the walls like stiffened tongues. None were lit. The wax does not forget. She read, I thought it might. I thought, if shaped properly, sin would harden like memory. But each mold returns the sound, a sigh, a name. Once, the name was mine. Elias did not interrupt. He traced a finger down the edge of the book, where the thread curved in patterns woven hair. Yes, but not randomly bound. Braided in Trinitarian knots, he whispered. It's not stitched. Eliza looked up. What? Then he swallowed. It's sealed. They turned the page together. More entries. The blade doesn't cut now. It remembers. Each time it presses, it learns the weight of what lies beneath. I think it could seal a soul, if only I found the right confession. Then farther down, in a different hand, I tried it with breath. I exhaled into the wax, pressed the blade. The wax did not cool. It listened. The next entry bore no date, only a name. Abel, 7 years old, confessed envy of unborn siblings. Wax poured, blade pressed, no more dreams since. A gap in the writing followed. Then jagged letters. There is a mouth in the mold, not carved. Formed it moves, not when watched. They paused. The air in the cellar was warmer now. The candles wept, not from flame, from within. Eliza stood. The blade had not been seen in decades. The sealer's wooden frame had burned in the chapel. Fire of 1802. But some whispered the blade had been kept reburied, reforged, into what? No one knew. Until now. Elias stepped toward the wax shelf. One candle flickered. Inside its base, a dark thread. He touched it. It hissed. He drew back. Eliza, he whispered. Look. She did. The wax soft in the warm cellar began to reshape. Not melt. Reshape. The candle bulged, then pinched, formed. Lips, not stylized. Reeled. They moved. No sound. Just the shape of words, long dried on bone. She backed away, but the diary still hung open. And now the wax on the spine glistened. The final page unfolded on its own. They read together. The sealer was wrong. Not for wax, not for memory, but for binding. The blade doesn't seal. It opens, and what it opens sings. Beneath that, scrawled in a trembling hand, I pressed the blade against my own voice last night. I feel lighter, emptier. The wax does not hum anymore. Elias shut the book, but the cellar did not fall silent, because the candles, all 17, began to hum. Not song, word, but pressure. Like something once inside a throat, now outside, still trying to echo. Eliza reached for the nearest candle. It whispered. One word. Confess. She dropped it. It shattered. Inside: not wick. A tooth. Old human. Milk. White. Ilias turned to the door. It had sealed. The wax had risen in its hinges. The air pulsed, and from the shelf behind them, one candle taller, heavier, darker, cracked, split, and from within the blade, blackened, smoothed from use, and still wet. Eliza stepped back, but her name had already been pressed. She felt it in her chest, as if her voice had been bound long ago, and now the wax was just remembering where to place the seal. She turned to Elias, but he had already opened his mouth, and, in his voice, not his own, the blade replied, "I was made to hold what no one dares bury." Storms in St. Lyle's came in threes, 3 gusts, 3 cracks of thunder, 3 hours of silence after the first drop. Eliza Sinclair had counted them since she was a child, back when the walls of the estate still wept in summer, and the roof above the choir loft hadn't yet caved in like a chest too long pressed down. It was during storms that her mother hummed, not lullabies, not scripture, a melody like Psalm 9, but not quite, too slow, too deep, like something sung through cloth or bone. Eliza would lie in the wooden cot beside the east-facing window and press her face into the pillow, waiting for the thunder, waiting for the hum, and it would always come half a verse too long, with words that stung like nettles. "I will praise thee, O Lord, with my whole hollow," and then silence, not the silence of peace, the silence of something holding its breath. No one else ever heard it. Her father said it was just rain. Her governess blamed the wind through broken stone. But Eliza remembered, and now, years later, it had returned. The melody came just past midnight, not from her mind, from the chapel, from the organ. No one had played it in decades. Its pipes were rusted, keys broken, soot lined the loft steps, and the sheet music that once fluttered there had long since crumbled to ash and glue. But the notes came slow, certain, like a hand still knew the shape. Even if the keys no longer bore names, Eliza rose from her cot without dressing. The floorboards knew her step. Her breath fogged the air. The wind outside screamed. Inside. The melody continued. She climbed the chapel stairs barefoot, hand grazing the stone as if seeking memory in its chill. The door to the loft stood ajar. No candle lit the path, but still, the notes moved. Psalm 9. But not. The rhythm was wrong. Each line held longer than the last, as though the song itself remembered drowning. She reached the loft's mouth. No one there, only the organ, its keys unmoved, but the sound remained low, not mournful, not played. Exhaled. She stepped into the room. The pipes glistened. The wet. A single line echoed. "When my enemies are turned back, they shall fall and perish at thy..." She stopped. The word wasn't there. Replaced. Replaced. Swallowed. The chord held, and beneath the organ bench, she saw a shape, a book. She bent, fingers trembling. It was not a hymnal. It was her mother's prayer journal, the one buried with her. She opened the cover. Her mother's name scratched out, replaced by a symbol. An open mouth with no tongue. She flipped through pages. Some were blank. Others bore music notations that didn't exist in any psalter. Others held words, verses rewritten. Her mother's hand, but her voice, she could hear it in the ink, faint like a child, speaking into the hollow of a well. She read, Psalm 9, the hollowing. "I will praise thee, O Lord, with my broken self. I will show forth all thy forgetting." Another, "When thou satest upon the throne judging right, the teeth were already gone from me. I bit into the veil, I swallowed the hymn." The pages smelled of soot and something sweeter, pine, sap, and behind it, milk. Old, sour. She pressed her fingers to the final page, a single line. "If I must be remembered, let it be through breath, not mine." The organ exhaled again. Not a chord this time, a voice. High, small, familiar, bubble quotes. "Mama." Eliza froze. Not her mother, a child. From the pipes, she leaned in. The air was warm and it wept. A single drop of wax slid from the highest pipe, then another. Then, a third. She stepped back. They hit the keys like tears, and played the first 3 notes. Again Psalm 9, but slower. Now, not a song, a summons. Eliza fell to her knees. She knew what this was. The Sinclair line had long since lost the faith that kept its name clean. But the house remembered. The air, the walls, the pipes, the wax, they all held confession. And now it needed to play. The floor groaned, the melody faltered, and then, suddenly, all the pipes exhaled at once. A full chord, filling the chapel, a sound like 20 mouths open in mid-prayer, caught between plea and scream. She covered her ears. Still it rang dot, and then dash silence, absolute, and in it, a whisper. You were named in the breath between verses. You were kept. Eliza wept. She did not know why. Only that it was true that she had not been born. She had been held in wax, in song, in a space between psalms where no name lived but hers. And her mother had hummed the ninth, not to soothe, but to warn. The melody was a memory, not of faith, of failure. She stood, the book still open in her hands, and on the final page, the ink bled anew, not from pen, from pipe, a single word, warm and wet. Again, Madeline Sinclair had not spoken in 40 years. They said her silence began after the fire, though others claimed it began long before, when the last bell was rung and the east wing sealed. Now she lived in a stone house on the chapel's edge, where no birds nested, where the grass refused to grow. A single window faced the graves. She never looked out. Eliza had only seen her once, as a girl, veiled in black, spine straight as a broom handle, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Her face, even then, looked uninhabited, like a mask left behind. And now, Elias had come to ask her a question. He did not believe in ghosts, but he believed in what remained. He found her in a high-backed chair beside the hearth. Unmoving, her skin was parchment, her mouth slightly open, but not for breath, held that way, perpetually, as if she'd once meant to scream and forgot how. The nurse, a woman with fingers like twine and eyes half lost to fear, greeted him without rising. She doesn't speak, she whispered, but she hums, sometimes. At night, Elias nodded, stepping forward. Which tune? The nurse hesitated. Psalm 9. He felt his chest tighten. Are you sure? She sings it wrong, she added. Wrong and low. Elias sat in the wooden chair beside Madeline. The air felt folded here, like something sacred had been crushed. Too many times. He removed the envelope from his coat. Inside, a page from the chapel registry. A name scratched out. Below it, the word silence, 1881. And beside that, a symbol. The open mouth. He held it in her view. No reaction, so he tried the word history. At first, nothing. Then a tremble at her temple. Then blood, not a gush. A slow weeping line from both ears. Dark, not fresh. The nurse gasped. Elias did not move. History, he said again, quieter. Madeline blinked. Once, the candle beside the hearth guttered. Though no draught stirred, the flame bent, folded inward, like prayer. Elias turned to the nurse. Has she always? She bleeds if you say it. The woman replied. History, truth, confess, anything tied to before. And yet, she hums. The nurse nodded. Only when the moon's gone. That night, Eliza prepared the bell's candle. Each vigil lit it once. No more. It was black wicked, beeswax heavy, infused with pine, ash, and the hair of the prior bell ring, gone without death. She lit it beside the old bell shaft, now sealed, though the cord still hung through the floor like a vein left, dangling. The flame caught, then recoiled. It burned black, not smoke-flame, as if the wick remembered something unclean. Eliza stepped back. The candle held. It should have burned sweet, maybe clean. It smelled of milk gone sour. Inside the house, Madeline began to hum. The tune filtered through the stone like water through cloth, low, ragged and wrong. Not Psalm 9 is printed, but the same one Eliza had heard her mother hum during storms. The same her cradle had rocked to. The version that ended not in praise, but plea. Elias stood. He moved toward her, her eyes locked to his. Still she did not speak. Still the blood flowed, thin lines now tracing her neck. I know what you were named, he said. Silence. She blinked again. Once. Twice. Then her jaw shifted. Slightly, and from her throat came a sound like wax, splitting in a mold. A whisper, a single word. Soot. Elias froze. Behind him, the nurse fled the room. The candle outside bent further. Eliza knelt beside it. It began to chant. Not burn - chant, words with no source, rising from wax, echoing in air, too dense to carry voice. Inside, Madeline reached to her lap, her fingers curled, cracked, opened, revealing a small scrap of cloth. She handed it to Elias. He unfolded it. A name embroidered in faded red thread. Silence. Sinclair. Below it, the open mouth. But beneath that, newly marked a single tear of wax. Still, warm. Elias turned to the window. The graves shimmered. Not with light, with memory. Each headstone bore a name. Each name bore a scratch, and all the scratches matched the symbol, now pressed in wax across the hearthstone. A mouth closed by force. Elias whispered. How many? Madeline opened her mouth wider, and from the back of her throat, not voice but hymn, Psalm 9. The version lost, the version bound, the one where God forgets, and names unspoken ring from the mouths of the stillborn. Outside, the candle went out, not with wind, but with breath, and behind Eliza, the bell rope pulled up, then down, and in the silence that followed, it rang. They had bricked up the nursery in 1880, but the air still knew its shape. Each year, at the autumnal equinox, the stones breathed dry, shallow inhalations that stirred nothing living, but teased a layer of ancient dust into motion. At first, just motes, then drifts, then forms. Child-size. Their outlines shimmered, as if shaped by memory rather than matter. Limbs held in unnatural stillness, fingers outstretched, mouths slightly parted, in the posture of a song too old to be remembered. No sound at first, only the weight of anticipation. Then the hymn began. Not melody, like a tune cracked by time, broken into rhythm but never rebuilt. Elias stood beneath the arch of the east wing, where the mortar had crumbled just enough to let a seam of breath escape. He watched the dust children gather behind the wall. He didn't speak. He listened. The hymn had no beginning. It rose from nowhere, with no key, no measure. A chant made only of held syllables, shaped by lungs long lost. And yet he understood. A lullaby, yes, but also a command. Behind him, Eliza lit a taper. The wick sputtered against the windless hall, the flame curling sideways before holding steady. We were warned, she said. Yes, Elias replied, but we were children. They uncovered the nursery by hand. No hammers, no chisel, only the slow peeling of time's dressing. Each brick loosened without protest, as though tired of keeping what should have been forgotten. Beneath a door of pine wood, grey and pulped with rot, Elias pressed his palm to the center. The grain vibrated, not sound. Breath. He pushed. It opened without creak, and the nursery exhaled. The room was circular, or nearly no angles, no corners. The walls bowed inward, painted once now streaked with soot, wax, and handprints. At the center stood a cradle. Empty. The ceiling held no beam, no light. The only illumination came from beneath the cradle, where a soft glow pulsed from the floorboards like the heartbeat of something buried deep. Eliza stepped forward first. The dust children retreated, not in fear, in reverence. They lined the walls, still singing without sound, eyes locked on the veil that draped the cradle's edge, a cloth the color of bone, damp, though the room was dry. Eliza knelt. She touched the veil. It twitched. She whispered, "You were never meant to sleep." The hymn grew louder, not in volume, but intimacy. It pressed against the ribs, wrapped around the lungs. A song meant to be inhaled, not heard. Elias stepped to the far wall. It bore writing, scratched with fingernails, over and over. "She will sing when we are still. We are the silence made flesh. No corners to hide, no shape to flee, only the veil." One line repeated, fainter each time. The cradle remembers. He turned back. Eliza had drawn the veil. The cradle was not empty. Inside lay dust-mounded in the shape of an infant. Unmoving. Not sculpted. Formed. Naturally. Painfully. Mouth agape. No eyes. No limbs. Just presence. Eliza whispered. Silence. The figure shuddered. A single note filled the chamber. Not from above. From within, the boards beneath. The cradle cracked, and the nursery changed. The dust children collapsed, formed to ash. But the song remained, sung now by the room itself. The walls pulsed, the air thickened, and from the cracks in the floor came wax. Slow, pale. It seeped upward, pooling beneath the cradle, reaching toward Eliza's feet. She did not move. The wax formed rings. 17. Each ring hummed, each note held. Eliza turned turned to Elias. Her voice was thin. I remember now. He stepped toward her. You were born here. I was sung here, she said. The cradle shifted. A single chain emerged from beneath the wax. Rust-red, short, it coiled at Eliza's knee. She took it, wrapped it around her wrist. The cradle's dust, child dissolved, not vanished, merged, not with the wax, with the chain. With her the hymn stopped. Silence, then dash. From the curved wall a final voice, not child, not adult. Choir, this is the room where names go to kneel. The glow beneath the floor died. Eliza stood. The chain tightened. The wax cooled, and behind her, where Elias had once stood, there was only dust. Still. Mouth open. Singing. The room where Elias had last been seen no longer breathed. Its window was ajar, but the curtains did not stir. The candle had guttered halfway down its wick, and then frozen mid-melt. The wax bent like a reaching finger. No books remained open. No coat draped on the chair. No breath left in the air. The ledger was gone. The hymnals, those were never there to begin with. Only the journal remained, sealed. Field, bound in pale leather, its corners blackened with soot. A ring of red wax affixed the cover shut, stamped with no crest but a circle of 13 mouths, each open, none complete. Eliza found it at dawn. Not delivered. Left, placed, at the foot of the chapel bell, where the rope once hung, the silence humming louder than any toll. She picked it up. The wax was warm. Inside a single note, handwritten in Elias's ink. History is not lost. It was buried. No goodbye. No date. No trace. She read the journal over 3 days, each entry shorter than the last, each line more breathless, more unmoored from language. Diagrams gave way to symbols. Margins bled red. Pages curled as though the ink itself exhaled heat. The final entry was barely legible. It sings from beneath now, beneath the cradle, beneath the veil, beneath me. I do not write this. I am being remembered. Eliza closed the book she had known. Not where Elias had gone, but what he had become. Sinclair memory did not preserve people. It rewrote them. Names became symbols. Lives became verses. And those who listened too long, too carefully sank into the song and rose again as part of its echo. She walked to the altar that night. The ledger sat in the sacristy, wrapped in the burial shawl of the last choir child, red-inked spine cracked. Her name written within more times than she had ever spoken. It aloud, she didn't hesitate. She laid it in the brazier, lit the match. The flame hesitated, then took the fire, blackened the cover, curled the corners, licked at the ink. The names hissed. A few tried to vanish, most did not. She fed it page by page. By morning, it was ash. And silence. Real silence. But it did not stay. 3 nights later, the red returned. Not in the ledger. On her wall, it came slowly, as though pushed from beneath the paint lines at first, like blood creeping from old stone. Then letters. Then verses. Written in a child's hand, but not a child's mind. You do not end a name by burning it. Another, beneath the window. Ash still sings if the breath remembers. Eliza tried to scrub it. Water bled, but the ink deepened. A hum rose, not from the walls, from beneath the floorboards. She stood in the center of her room and listened. She recognized the tone. Not Ilias's voice, not her mother's. Silence, not absence. The child. The vessel. The hymn before breath. She dropped to her knees and pressed her ear to the boards. She heard humming. Psalm 9. But fractured. Woven now with her own name. She wept, not from fear but grief. She had come this far. Lit the bells. Candle. Read the wax letter. Burned the ledger. She had tried to stop it, to forget, but the house was not a place. It was a hymn. The walls, the nursery, the veil, the fontanelle refrains. And now her room had joined the choir. The next morning, the townsfolk saw her walking barefoot toward the chapel. She carried nothing, wore only linen. She did not return. The door sealed behind her. Some say they heard the bell ring once, not by rope, but voice. Others say they saw wax drip from the eaves for 7 days after. But no one opened the door. No one dared inside. Only dust remained, dust and names. And on the far wall, etched with fresh ink, he played with chains. I played with silence. You played with fire, and the hymn never ends. The ink glistened. Still wet, still red, still warm.